Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see everybody here in person. I'm just going to put a little timer on so that I don't run over my time because I'm very keen that we hear more from our panelists than from me. But I just wanted to welcome you all and give you a bit of a context for today. I'm not sure how many people we have online. Emma, do you know how many we have online, roughly? 52. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. So we've got a really great turnout for today. So I think it's probably indicative of how important this topic is. And we've got Hilary Noon here from UKRI who's going to talk through a lot more of why perhaps this is such a topical thing for us at the moment and what the motivations are. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview about narrative CVs and give you some context. So last year, we actually initiated this collaboration with the University of Strathclyde. It came about through Emma and I attending an event together and getting chatting and saying we should collaborate more. And well, why don't we then? So we just did it. And then this year we've opened it up and invited two other universities, Dundee and Queen Margaret, to join us. So it's really exciting. I think that for us in Scotland, I think we are pioneering a lot of this kind of collaboration work in the research culture space, and that we see narrative CVs as being a really important part of that work in supporting people in developing their careers, supporting you to secure funding for research and other aspects of the benefits of writing narrative CVs. And at Heriot-Watt University, my colleague Catalina Bastidas is here with us today. We've been running narrative CV workshops, so we're going to be doing a much more interactive sort of hands-on session later on today about kind of getting to grips with writing a narrative CV. So this morning it's more about sharing our experiences and what narrative CV is all about, really. So you've probably heard a little bit about them. I'm just going to touch on a few things because I know Hilary's going to go into a bit more detail. We try to dovetail our presentation, so hopefully they'll be quite complementary. But the narrative CVs were actually originally created in the US and then brought to the UK by the Royal Society, and we're now seeing them increasingly used. UKRI has led the way, really, in requiring a narrative CV format for funding applications. Many other countries are also adopting this format, and it means that universities are able to align with the Concordat for supporting researcher development, the DORA, Declaration on Research Assessment for responsible evaluation of research. So this is a way for us to move away from much more traditional CVs, which just list all the typical kind of, grant application or grant funding, publications, H-index, number of citations, which is all factual and very interesting, but actually doesn't really allow you to showcase all of the other amazing things that you might do as a researcher. So one of the reasons that narrative CVs are being introduced is to enable us all to really showcase the work that we do as individuals, but also collectively. And I think that's one of the things that I have found really exciting about working with people on narrative CVs, is it just gives people the chance to talk about not just themselves and what they do as a researcher, but also how they foster research culture and how they support other researchers in their career development. So it means that we can recognise, diverse experiences through research development and research careers. We can recognise that not everybody has a linear journey necessarily, and that all of the hidden work that we do, and really does, if we're thinking about equality, diversity and inclusion, it really does give us a chance to mitigate for the sort of barriers that people might experience because you get to tell your story. So this is a nice diagram which I've crediting with from Kate Murray at University of Cambridge, who put this together, which shows that a narrative CV really means that you're talking about you, of course, because you're wanting to showcase the work that you do, but you're not just talking about who you are as a superstar individual researcher. You're talking about who you are and how you generate knowledge, how you develop others, how you contribute to the research community, and how you, and therefore your research and the work that you do contributes to broader society. So the narrative CV does enable you to do that. This is a diagram that's been developed by Hilary that she shared with us, and she's updated this recently, so I won't take too much away from her. But you can see, I think it's a very striking diagram that the narrative CV enables us to really address all of the invisible items that are on this iceberg here below the water, because a traditional CV will focus a lot more on what's above the iceberg. So, as I said, publications, citations, all that kind of factual, quantitative information that's easy to collect. But what about all the qualitative stuff, all of the other things that you do, which perhaps won't necessarily be captured in quantitative data sets? So this I think is a very striking image. And I think most people respond to this very well when they see it, because they go, oh yeah, actually, there's all this other stuff that I do that nobody really knows about and nobody really talks about. So the goal of a narrative CV, and for us getting together today, is for us to talk about it, is for us to talk about all of that stuff that is unseen. So this is actually the structure of the narrative CV template for UKRI in particular, but every different funders will have different structures potentially, and narrative CVs might take a different format depending on what you're using them for. So this is the example of the UKRI format, and I always kind of do a little bit of a warning, a health warning, if you like, that it's only 2 pages. So it's not actually a lot. So you have to really think carefully about what information you include and why you're including it. So in my experience, so I applied for my role as Associate Principal for Research Culture just over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And one of the remits of my role was to roll out training for narrative CVs, encourage people to develop narrative CVs in my university, Watt University. So I thought, well, if I'm applying for the job and it says you have to do narrative CV training, I better write narrative CV then. But it was actually a really good experience, because by walking through that experience myself and learning about what was involved and what kind of the ideal CV looks like, I got the job, yay. And but also it meant that I had the real insider experience, if you like, on going through that process myself and learning about what worked for me. And I think what I would recommend is that you keep in mind is that your narrative CV is going to look very different from somebody else's. So we often get asked when we do our training to share examples of different CVs, and we're happy to do that. And we have a repository of CVs that we do share that, with permission from the people that have gone through our workshops, but with the caveat that you say, well, just because somebody else's reads like this doesn't mean that yours should also read like this, because it is a very individual journey that you're on as a researcher at whatever career stage that you're at, whether you're a PhD student or an established professor, all the way through, and people in other research support roles as well, technicians, people who are in professional partnerships, professional services and so on. These narrative CVs can also be of benefit to you. But it is always good to look at other examples just to get some ideas about what might work for you, but don't be too wedded to them. Is what I would say. There are lots of resources there from University of Glasgow, which was the set of resources I looked at initially. But since then, there's a lot of more guidance has been developed. So I would definitely recommend you look at the UKRI resources and also others from Cambridge, from Leeds. Various universities have shared openly the resources that they've developed for writing narrative CVs, which we refer to in our own training, because I think, well, why reinvent the wheel? If there's resources out there already, then please do draw on them, and they're all freely available. I really do encourage you as well to, when you're developing drafts, get other people to read them and get different people to read them as well. I had lots of different people reading mine, from academics to people in the research, our research engagement hub, which supports grant applications and so on. And it was really good to get all the different perspectives that people in different roles and different career stages, people that were familiar with my research and my leadership, and people that were less so that they were coming much more with fresh eyes. So in the end, I felt that I did end up with a narrative CV that did kind of represent what I wanted to say, and that would be easily understood by a range of different people. So a few tips really going forward to keep in mind. Be specific about your track record when you're developing a narrative CV. Try and use lay language. So don't assume that people necessarily who are reading the CV will understand your discipline or the terminology that's used in your discipline. Use funder language if you're applying for research funding. So look at the kind of criteria that the funders have, and I'm sure Hilary will talk a bit more about that. Be specific about the impact that you've generated. That's one of the key things around the narrative CVs. It gives you the opportunity to talk about public engagement, about knowledge exchange, about impact, that it's not just the list of publications and this is how much money I secured, but what was I able to do as a result of the research that I've done. And be careful about what information you put where. So because if you're looking at the modular structure, for example, of the UKRI template, there are some bits where you think, oh, this information could go here or it could go there. Like we often get the question, well, is this a contribution to the academic community or is it a contribution to the wider community? And sometimes it can be both. So it really depends on how it forms as part of your narrative. And so this is why it's such an individual exercise. Don't undersell yourself. So I think I used to think it was a very British thing, but I've spoken to so many different researchers from so many different parts of the world who say it's the same, that people often feel like they're bragging, like, oh, I can't say that because it just sounds like I'm bragging. But if you don't sell yourself, who else is going to? And the whole point of a narrative CV, especially if you're applying for funding, is you're convincing someone to fund you and not somebody else, or you or your team. Rather than somebody else, because there are also narrative CV requirements for team applications as well. And try and avoid repetition. I could go on with more tips, but I might save them for when we actually do the workshop, because I think it'd be much more interesting to hear about some other experiences. And also to hear from you as well once we open up for some discussion, comments, questions, and hopefully a lot of you will be able to stay on for the actual more practical workshop later on. So I'm really excited to see you all here. As you can see, I'm quite excited about narrative CVs. I think they're a real game changer for us in our field, or in our, in the research landscape. And so the more we talk about them and the more we kind of promote them, I think the more we'll really embed them in our practice. So going forward. So enough from me. I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, which is Hilary Noon from UKRI. Over to you, Hilary, and for your enlightenment.
Let's see if I can not break things with computers up here. Thank you very much, Mina, for that. I'm Hilary Noon, in case anyone doesn't know me. I'm a research and innovation culture lead at UKRI, and I'm going to cover some of the, will I move that on? There we go. So cover some of the funder perspectives and motivations for using narrative CVs. So first off, it's really about addressing some of the most complex challenges, like a lot of what we're facing today locally and globally. And we need a real diversity of talent, skills, ideas, and experiences in order to actually be able to help address those. And creativity and innovation actually thrive when difference is valued, sought out, and catalyzed discussions engaged. And this means we really must diversify the R&I pathways so that people can move into and out of and around the system easily in lots of different ways, whatever their role. And this will bring in a lot more ideas into the R&I system and connect it more deeply with society. Now, it's very deliberate that the UKRI has actually called their narrative CV the resume for research and innovation. And that is so that it actually works for everybody in the R&I system, not just those that identify as researchers or innovators. So there's a lot of contributions that make a thriving R&I system, and the narrative CV, a lot like what Jemina has gone through, is designed to be inclusive and move beyond the traditional academic CV of list of publications and funding and awards and things like that, stuff that might not actually be a good indication of what we need. So we need to be able to change the tools to be able to better identify the people and ideas that need the support to flourish, to help us address these challenges. But there's an awful lot of reasons for adopting narrative CVs, not just that. So you might have seen this before in a number of different places. And the narrative CV is very, very flexible for an awful lot of different agendas. So by creating a more inclusive process, it actually allows for better description of varied career pathways, skills, and reduced focus on continuous productivity, which, let's be honest, affected an awful lot of people during COVID. And it enables an awful lot more roles and people and approaches to be highlighted. It's about creating the right incentives. So looking at the healthy and functioning R&I ecosystem that really has a breadth of contributions in order to be able to actually have a tool that reflects that. And also about recognizing and making and rewarding team science and collegiality, because some of these things cannot be achieved without all of the different roles in the system. It's also enabling us to reduce barriers across different disciplines and sectors and roles, because people are able to better describe the outputs and put into context that helps aid reviewers in terms of the kind of significance of the impact of their activity or contributions, which is a really great tool in terms of being able to move across different roles and disciplines and sectors. It's also about responsible research assessment, which Jemima mentioned around Quora, DORA, all of our different concordats, and making sure that we are not looking at the quantity of outputs, but more about the quality and the significance and impact of them. And I've got reducing bureaucracy. So how we can reduce unnecessary bureaucracies. So instead of having lots of different varied formats and guides, that we can take a single approach wherever possible. So when you're applying for the likes of UKRI or actually also other organizations, because one thing that we have to keep in mind of all of this is we are a global RNI system across everywhere. So this brings me on to one of the aspects about how we approach this work is just as important as why we're doing it. So while it came and originated from a UK government commitment on people and culture strategy, the programme actually role models how we can join up and embed the values and behaviours that we want to see and experience in the system. So we connected with a lot of funders, employers, professional bodies, that we collaborated, co-produced a lot of resources for all so that they were shared in the Resume Resources Library. And this actually helped us prevent duplication, shared expertise, and saved money. And it also meant that everybody could contribute towards a shared mission. So we could find alignment wherever possible, making it easier for people who would apply for or review for lots of different organizations. And one of the things we also did was think about how we're doing stuff, about who we're involving. So this wasn't just the people with the right job titles or so on. It was the people who were running the grants who were helping write a lot of these resources, the people who were helping people apply and develop their narrative CVs. We're talking about what should go in here. And we made sure that everything was shared openly, freely, and available to all through Zanado on the Resume Resources Library, so that everyone was able to contribute anywhere, all over the world, and that it wasn't a case that it was, if you were attached to a very rich organization, you would have an added advantage. So we wanted to make sure that nobody was left behind in this work. Just to give you an idea of the kind of organizations that have been involved, we had a joint funders group, obviously looking at funding, but we also had an alternative uses group looking at, imaginatively named, all the different alternative uses. That group has grown and changed, and you'll see even some of them are actually in different countries. We have ones in New Zealand, I think is the furthest away, which is quite interesting in terms of time zones and collaborations of meetings. So just to give you an idea of the scale of the joined up effort. Now, what we also wanted to make sure as part of this was about how we would role model responsible policy intervention. So traditional academic CVs were just organic. They appeared and we accepted them. We wanted to see how we could role model a research approach to a research and innovation intervention by testing, making notes, feeding back, and informing the next and iteratively developing it. So this is where we've actually created, like on the right-hand side, you'll be able to see our approach. So the library, how we pilot, evaluate, and how feedback's in. And then also the shared evaluation framework that we built together with all those organizations that looked at all of the different aspects about the narrative CV and people's experience of it. So that evaluation and evidence was baked in, not added on. And then also how we role model the learning loop and listening to feedback and fostering collaboration as part of it. What's very interesting as part of that is the shared evaluation framework is a minimal common product that anyone can use anywhere in the world. So if you want to pilot, you've got a question, surveys, everything ready for you there. So you can ask the same questions that other organizations in the world are using and contribute to a global evidence base in what you're working. So you don't have to have lots of money to be able to commission evaluations with different consultants and so on. You can do this yourself in your own MS forms or anything like that. So it's how you build it, role modeling the inclusion as part of it all the way through. So now, you have to listen to the feedback, right? Absolutely useless if you don't. So we built this. Now, it's called a peer exchange platform for narrative CVs. So we heard from a lot of the community who before, there was a lot of support from different groups developing workshops and so on, saying they wanted examples of what good narrative CVs look like. Now, this is problematic for a number of different reasons, because if you start to create an example of a good narrative CV, you then start to create something of the gold standard that everyone thinks they should copy. And that is exactly what we want to avoid. And also, if you did that, you'd also inadvertently send a message that if, say, some contribution that Jemima really values wasn't listed on that, like something she was very proud of, it could inadvertently send a message that the sector doesn't see that as visible and valued. And we don't want that. We want this to be what people believe shows their best self. So a lot of funders have actually specifically decided not to create a library of examples for this reason. Instead, we've created this, the peer exchange platform for narrative CVs, which enables and facilitates kind of mini mentoring across the world, any role, any discipline, any career stage. You might be in the sector, you might be outside of it, you might be wanting to explore. You can contact anyone there and ask them about how you might articulate a particular experience for a particular opportunity. They will drop you a line. They might share you a bit of their narrative CV or how to articulate something. You might get the job as a result of that feedback. And then you actually know somebody who works in that area. So it also helps in terms of the cultural integration in a new organization or area, a sector. So it was launched in March 2024. We're still trying to get the word out to everybody, so please do share it. It's free, and it's actually really popular because it aligns with an awful lot of different agendas for every kind of organization, including responsible research assessment, but also things around open research and research integrity. So you can actually contact somebody and ask questions, how did you actually tackle that? So on. It has got free mentoring training on there, and it also has free narrative CV training, and it will soon be linked to ORCID. So if you sign up on there and you provide some mentoring, you'll actually have that mentoring listed as an output in your ORCID record. And that goes for every role in the system, not just academics, it's technicians, library staff, administration, professional services, everyone. So it's all part of us trying to shift the whole reward and recognition system and how to make it easier. So Jemima gives some really good examples before in terms of, how you create something once, you reflect on it, and then you can have a master kind of narrative CV, and then using the modules as a guide, and then you curate your content for lots of different opportunities. So it's actually very green. You produce stuff once, you reuse and you recycle. But what we're trying to do is shift the whole system. So some funders are actually piloting using narrative CVs in recruiting peer reviewers, and this can have a ripple effect. So if you change how you recruit the people who are going to be around the table making decisions, you're actually also going to start to change the different values and perspectives that are actually looking at the applications that come in. And this actually then helps to shift the dial on what's visible and valued. But narrative CVs are not a silver bullet on their own. It actually sits in a lot more of an interconnected system of changes. So all of them together can work and shift things. So for example, in UKRI, we're working on how we engage the public in the work in terms of informing our research investment and our skills and talent investment and connecting it more deeply with society. We're looking at the policies of how we fund and who we fund, so who's eligible to apply, who can be the impacts of demand management, different kind of innovative funding programs like the Community Knowledge Fund, Women in Innovation, or CCRM. And then we're supporting how we promote open research so we can learn and build from the knowledge that we've actually invested in. And this is all about building a more attractive, vibrant, inclusive and agile R&I system. So we're all working together for that. And I keep saying this all the time. It's really important we don't do this in isolation. We need to join up, collaborate, and communicate to save us all time, money, and duplication. And in doing so, we'll actually start to embed the behaviors we want to see in a vibrant, inclusive, organized system. So please share with others, and we'll make it a lot better. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass over to Marine. Yep. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mehreen Gul, and I'm an assistant professor in architecture engineering, which is a fancy name for building services engineering. So today I'm going to share my experience of narrative CV writing. And this is a team narrative CV, so it's not an individual one that I'm going to share. And it relates to a project that I've recently acquired funding for. It's called Advancing the Use of Biochar in the Building Industry, a multi-stakeholder study. So it was funded by the UKRI Cross Research Council Responsive Mode Scheme. It's one of the new pilot schemes. Second round is now underway. So the emphasis for the scheme was on interdisciplinary research. It was 32.5 million in terms of total funding, 36 to be funded out of 175, if I remember. Maximum value of the award was 1.2 million. And out of these 36 projects, one of was my project. So really pleased with that. So the assessment criteria for this call was you have to really articulate your vision, the interdisciplinary vision and approach. And then R4RI, which is a resume for research and innovation, or the applicant and team capability to deliver, and ethics and responsible research and innovation. So there's 4 different elements. And of course, we are here to talk about the R4RI, which I'm going to share some insights in terms of what I did. So we were a team of 4 with all different expertise, Heriot-Watt University, Aston University Birmingham, and University of Birmingham, the collaborators. And for this section, the question was, are you the right individual or team to successfully deliver the proposed work? And in the guidelines, it says, see the UKRI guidance on R4RI. So I did exactly that. And what they were asking for is to showcase the range of relevant skills and how this will help deliver the work, already explained by Jemina and Hilary. Emphasize where appropriate key skill each team member brings, and includes individuals' specific achievements, but only past contributions that best evidence their ability to deliver this work. So in terms of evidence, it's about, of course, the relevant experience, right balance of skills, expertise, appropriate leadership and management skills, approach to develop others, and contributions. So very difficult at the start to compose a CV, which is 1,000 words, 4 team members, so roughly 250 words per person. So it was a hard task. So I started off by asking people to send me their 250 words. And then they started sending me their CVs. I said, no, I don't want your CV, because that meant that I had to go through each and every CV and extract information. So I had to go back and say, no, you have to send me at least maybe, even not 250, maybe at least 500 words, so that I can maybe pick out the points that will relate to each of the module. So the first module, which already been explained by Hilary, and contributions to the generation of new ideas, tools, methodologies, or knowledge. So this is how I expressed the whole team. So for example, I began with saying, PI with expertise in this, led this fellowship scheme, or with the industrial partner, the stakeholder engagement experience is really relevant. And it will contribute to these phases of the project. So how we do work packages, for example, I did in phases. So I said in phase 1 to phase 4, all of my expertise will be really important, because I will do this, I will do that. And then for each of my co-investigators, so co-lead 1, they have building energy modeling is the main element of the main disciplinary element of the project. So that co-investigator will bring in their expertise in that, and that will be used in phase 1 and 2, and they have done these projects before. And I always provide the project numbers or the grant numbers so that the reviewers know straight away that I'm not making things up and there is some evidence there. And then co-lead 2 is social scientists. So that's the other discipline that's key. So they have an array of these many qualitative approaches will be explored throughout the project. I'm not going to read each and every word, but just giving you an idea of what I did there. And then the co-lead 3 is the lead of this, and she has expertise in the carbon negative materials, which is also another important disciplinary aspect. So that was the first module, roughly 250 words. And then number 2 is the development of others and maintenance of effective working relationships. So this is where I talked about not just the research that I'm proposing, but other things that I've done in the past. So for example, I was the chair of the Athena Swan for my school. So I brought that in, and likewise other examples we can bring in. So why I'm an effective leader? Because because I have been and still the senior director of studies for my program. And as I mentioned, Athena Swan, so I wrote that. And then co-lead to the mentored a number of academics, assuming responsibility over 70 research active staff as the head of the Decent Work Research Center at Manchester Metropolitan University and so on. So for all of the 4 co-investigators, for the investigators, I filled this section. And then the contributions to the wider research and innovation community. Yes, this is a difficult one because you see so many overlaps with the next section, as Jemina already mentioned. So one thing I did was I did not repeat any information. So I just split the information and put in both sections. So for example, I'm a contributor to Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineering Guides, JA&A. I'm the reviewer. So this is where you say you are the reviewer, you are the technical committee member, because this is how we are serving the broader research and innovation community. And for co-lead 1, so they are the team leader for Scottish Energy Technology Partnership, linking research with industry. Advisory panel member for UK Scottish government. He's a member of technical committee in Europe. So just showcasing the range and the breadth of all the expertise, all the things that we have done as a team. And likewise for co-lead 2, she has vast experience in workshops. And I also mentioned that she and I already had a previous collaboration, which shows that it's not something built from scratch. So there is already some previous connections, which I think also makes an impact if there is any previous collaboration there. Yeah, and likewise for co-lead 3. And for the final module, which is the broader research innovation users' contributions. So I talked about one of the projects where I was looking at the experience of ethnic minorities in terms of intersectionality and how that hampers or help them to prosper in their career ambitions. And so this is, I think, is a broader, is an example of a broader community engagement because the outputs are very relevant in terms of how organizations can help their ethnic minority staff to be able to progress, because there's so many things we don't really care about or we don't really know actually. I think that's the first thing. We don't really know that such things can make life difficult for people from outside the UK who are not native British. And yes, a similar example for co-lead 1 and examples for co-lead 2 and co-lead 3. So what kind of things they have done which have actually made an impact in terms of wider research, wider community. So in terms of project partners, so I think what's most important is that we should have support from our industry, for my project at least. I mean, and if there are project partners, then we have to demonstrate the role in the project, in the CV as well, because they're part of your team. It's not just the core team, but it's also them there. And then weaving in maybe 1 or 2 lines in every section about what project partner one would bring, what they do. I think that helped as well. For example, Project Partner 3 is the largest European academic energy research partnership, and they will facilitate our interactions with its expert network across universities, because stakeholder engagement was a very important element of this interdisciplinary project. So this is where this organization is really helpful. And then PP4, 5, 6, 7, and what their role and how they can help. And then finally 8. So there were 8 project partners, as you can see by the numbers. So finally, things to remember. So the first 2 things are from the UKRI. So complete this as a narrative. So write it like a story. It's always make things easier to read if they are like coherent, logical, and simple words, rather than just very complex or technical information that you give it to somebody people don't understand. So make it easy for people to read. And of course, not format it like a CV. And then balance your answer. So it doesn't really mean that you have to feel each and every skill that you have, or each and every success that you have, but maybe highlight the ones that are more relevant. Otherwise, it's really complicated because of the word limit, that everything seems important to us, but you need to pick the ones that you think will make the more impact, and then balance your answer with your co-leads or your project partners. And I also think that an opening statement and a closing statement is also good. So when you open the narrative CV, the first headline is what this team would bring. So for example, as simple as like the team has contributed to the generation of new ideas, tools in the field of low carbon building. So that's the headline. So they straight away they know that all of us have some link with low carbon buildings, stakeholder consultation, and building modeling and characterization of materials. And likewise, a line to close would also be, I think, helpful. So that's me. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Michaela Tuk, so I'm going to try to stick to this. Usually I walk a lot when I speak. So I am a professor of mathematics at Heriot-Watt University. So the title I was given is talk about your own experience with the narrative CV. So I'm not going to give any advice also because I don't think I'm qualified, but I'm going to tell you how it clicked for me, because for me it really clicked. So at the beginning so it must be said, I was writing the CV because I was applying for a grant, an EPSRC grant. And it was actually the first time that for an EPSRC grant, we were required to write the narrative CV. So there was really only one person in our whole department that had written a narrative CV. I had no examples. And so I went along to the first workshop that Jemina organized on this, but it was the first. So we had only Gemina's, in fact, narrative CV as an example, plus the other example of this guy in my department. We had nothing. I was desperate, to say the least. And I mean, I really didn't know what to do. And I kept really not reading the guidance. I was only in despair. I wasn't really actually reading. And then at some point, so Jemina and Catalina, they organized this workshop and I went along. And I must say, usually I don't like looking at, like even when you write a grant proposal, you look at other grants and you try and see what's good and what's bad, right? You try and see, no, I don't like this, I'm not going to redo this. Oh, this is good, I'm going to keep this. But there has to be an emphasis on the positive. Whereas for me, with the narrative CV, actually, the bad CVs helped a lot more than the good CVs. So at the workshop, thank God, we had a lot of bad CVs, not because they were, but because it was the first attempt. So what did I notice? That a lot of what people were doing was just saying the same thing, but in a lot more words. Because of this narrative thing. Again, bear in mind, it was the first time. So there was this idea, oh, wait, I've got to write some Dickensian something. But then I thought, wait, what's the point? Just whoever the referee is going to fall asleep. So this is not it. And then it was as if everyone was obsessed with trying to come up with something new. As in, come up with a new idea. We were all treating like a research project somehow, which it isn't. So it's your CV. Your life, as in professional life, has been what it has been. You cannot go and change it. So what clicked for me is something really silly, and it is the fact that my CV, I mean, look at what I've done so far. It is what it is. I cannot change that. But finally, I could really write in my way. And then I went and reread what actually was the description of the 4 sections, what I was asked to do. And I thought, wait a second, I wasn't allowed to write this stuff in here before. How come now I am allowed? But I've done a lot of this. Really, can I put it here now? And I was a little bit surprised at the beginning. Do they really want this from me? It was the thing that actually I hadn't seen the iceberg before, so just I've seen it now. All the stuff that is below the iceberg, I do a lot of that. But before, I really wasn't allowed to put it there. People would have laughed when there was just a track record. I think they would have even not taken it seriously. So I would always naturally sort of select things out of my professional CV. Now, all of a sudden, when I reread the description of the 4 sections, I thought, wait, so I'm allowed to do this? Oh, no, I'm allowed to do also that. Oh, good. So I started putting stuff in there. So what helped me a lot was, first of all, again, that I didn't, from the point of view of content, that I didn't have to select things out. I could just leave them in. And the second thing was the style. I'm not sure the narrative is the best word, but I see why they went for that. For me, it was really that I could really tell a story, put everything in a context. It wasn't, I have X publications, Y PhD students, it wasn't that. I could actually put it in context and show the sort of, when I do things, I do them with a logic. The logic you might not agree with, but I do them with a certain vision. They are consequential. And this is true both of my research, and it's true also of the, how we call them, the leadership roles I take on. I build on the previous. And I could show this. So this is what I mean by giving context. I'm gonna try to be a little bit more concrete. So I'm gonna first say what this storytelling has helped me with, still a bit more abstractly, and what the content part helped me with, the change in the content. And then I'm gonna give more concrete examples. So the storytelling part helped a lot immensely with presenting my contributions to knowledge, because I think that you could really take my papers and sort of split them into, this is, I'm trying to follow this line of research, here I'm trying to follow this line of research. They look very separate, but in reality, there is something in common. For some other things, they are separate. So I could explain this, but I'm not going to say a lot of this because this would require more time. Contributions to wider research community. So this for me was a game changer. So because all of a sudden there was a bit less emphasis on these formal roles and more actually on what I do. So there are things I do irrespective of whether I have a formal role for that or not. And before it would have been difficult to put it there. Now you can just explain it, especially because you can explain it in context. And actually, when you explain it in context, it takes fewer words to explain it. Same thing for the contribution to broader research and innovation of users. So I don't know if I am exactly a pure mathematician, but I'm definitely more on the pure side of mathematics. And in reality, however, especially at the time, I was starting to try and move the first steps towards collaborating more with people outside academia. But I couldn't have done a list like I have the 3 KTPs or whatever else. I didn't have that. So, however, again, in context, especially related to their research project that I was, the grant that I was applying for, that really made a lot of sense. So I could explain a little bit what I was trying to do. And if you're actually trying to do it, then it comes out in a convincing way. The storytelling helped me immensely for the section contribution to the development of others. This is actually where normally when writing just a track record, I would have included none of this. Whereas now, again, I could put a lot of stuff in there. And this actually was the section that at the beginning was scaring me the most. I thought, what the heck am I doing for others? What do I do? And And instead, then I realized, wait, I have a lot of content here. So let me be a little bit more concrete. So the contribution to the development of others. I have taken an excerpt from the CV. So mentors, early career colleagues in the mathematics department on the writing of the grant applications with individual feedback on various stages of the proposal, on reply to referees, and on preparation for fellowship interviews. She takes up opportunity to promote the career of more junior colleagues, having nominated some for relevant prizes in mathematics and statistics. So in reality, there is a lot of stuff that I can put in there. And in general, I really believe in sort of helping if you want, the next generation of mathematicians, from PhD students through to early career colleagues. And I don't know how I didn't see this before. It was actually why I was trying to write this that I saw it. So I could start writing things like this that, again, they would have had no place in a track record. Again, if you nominate people for prizes, if you help people with writing the proposals, I don't have a formal role for that. I never had a formal role for that. Nonetheless, I do it. So I can put it in there. I have helped a lot with the Piscopia initiative. So if you've never heard of it, the Piscopia initiative actually was started with some of the students of the CDT, for which I was cohort director at the time. We're talking about 8 years ago. And it is, again, student-led. It is to help, they substantially help students from a diverse background come into mathematics. They help them write their CV. I didn't meddle too much with what they do because they are great at what they do, but at the beginning I helped them a lot set up the thing, look for funds, in anything they wanted me to do. Like I went along to give talks to help these students apply for the PhD positions. So I helped them a lot. Again, that goes in there. Again, commitment to support the next generation of mathematicians. All my leadership roles, all the roles I have had, I have never said yes to roles that I cannot do convincingly. So, and I think I can show this conviction in the roles I have taken up in my CV. So I just put them in context. So instead of listing them, I sort of explained that I was building up towards something. And again, that really helps you to synthesize, right? It helps a lot. Again, examples. Sorry, I think that there was something else I wanted to say. Well, I'll come back to this. So instead, examples for the contribution to the wider research community. Again, I hadn't realized that here I was doing a lot, and here this was scaring me. And a few examples. So let me say, what helped me here in the narrative CV is not so much that I had a list of things I do for the wider community, but again, the fact that I do them with the logic. So when I was looking at other narrative CVs, sometimes there was a really long list separated just with commas of I've been the director of, manager of this, head of this and of the other, but what have you done in these roles? So there was none of that. So to me, it's a lot more meaningful to select few that perhaps are more, of course, if you can, write about them all if you have space, but selecting few that perhaps are more related to the grant for some reason. For example, if they want you for the particular grant to show leadership in some sense rather than in another. So what I mean by this, we all organize seminars, right? However, with what logic to organize them? What do you do? What's special about the things you organize? So I'm no longer, but I was co-organizer of the One World Dynamic Seminar. And there, the way I wrote it there is just as one line, pushing to reach out to institutions in developing countries. That's because these One World Dynamic Seminars, to me, they always looked like they were not very much one world. They were usually Europe and US. So we tried to expand it. So, but that's something, again, you can put in there. And now, I'm not showing you the whole CV, but when you really put it together, it really starts to tell a story. Again, we all organize conferences, but what's special about your conferences? Aside from content, I think that what's special about, sorry for, what's special about my conferences is that I'm really, really keen on PhD student participation, and I've had the record numbers. This marries very well with all my leadership roles that I've had. All the leadership roles that I've had, they are about PhD students. So yeah, again, I think that where this thing helped me was adding value that before I could not bring into the proposal. It really helped me to show a side of my career that before really was below water. And I'm gonna stop here.
I'm going to ask our panelists to come and sit up at the front, if you wouldn't mind. I think we're a little bit behind time, but we've still got about 10 or 15 minutes for a little bit of Q&A and discussion before we'll have a break. And then hopefully, if you're interested in getting your hands dirty or clean, then stay on for the next part of the workshop, which is going to be a bit more hands-on. But thank you so much. It was really great to have 3 different perspectives on the value and the benefits of writing a narrative CV. So Hilary coming from UKRI and the funders' perspective and talking very much about that co-creation. And I think what's really exciting is that we can see that this is not just one funder saying we require this of people applying for our funding. We can see it's actually a community-wide, global-wide initiative that's been co-created from the community, from the ground up, with a lot of input from people who are in the different roles, different researchers, and different research support staff, people at different career stages, in different roles, have contributed to the development of this framework, which we're now starting to see implemented. So as I said, I wrote a narrative CV to apply for my job, and we're Heriot-Watt are starting to think about using a narrative CV template internally for things like applying for secondary roles or applying for promotion. Other universities are starting to introduce these frameworks too. So we are seeing a much wider application of this, not just by funders. And we've seen great examples here from 2 of our speakers talking about team CVs and individual CVs. And yes, we can see clearly that there are some challenges in pulling together a narrative CV because you do have to think differently, but also the massive benefits in pulling together. And I was so happy, Michaela, to hear you say that basically you were a convert because you were kind of like, what am I going to do with this thing? How is this going to work? And all of a sudden you just like the light bulb moment where everything just seemed to fall into place. And Maureen, your approach in bringing your team together to create a CV, because it is difficult when you've only got a limited number of words, especially when you're doing a team CV. And I think what really struck me was the fact that when we think about writing a narrative CV, we've really got to think about focusing on what is the purpose of this CV? Why are we writing it? Is it for funding? Is it for a job application? What kind of funding am I applying for? Is it an individual? Is it a team? Because then you need to be really selective and really concentrate on what you want to share that's going to speak to the purpose of that CV. So as many people will have said to me, well, I've been a professor for 20 years. I've done so much, in different capacities. I can't possibly include it all in 2 pages. And one person actually said to me, it's much easier just to write a list. I'm just going to write, writing the list is traditional CV. It's much easier. It's much better. I much prefer it. I said, yeah, I know. But if you want to apply for UKRI funding, then you have to write narrative CV. You haven't got a choice. So, and actually just bear with it, just stick with it. And then you'll find, and in the end, they came back and went, actually, yeah, I was able to highlight all the really critical things for the purposes of this, and also not just highlight what I'd done, but highlight what other people had done that I'd worked with too. So it's very much more a collective attitude. So I would like to start off by opening up to the floor and also to people online, if anyone has any comments or questions. I've got a couple of things I'd like to ask if people don't have any questions, but I'd like to open up first of all and see if anybody has any questions for either Maureen, Michaela or Hilary. Some online? Should we take one from online initially? Or let's take one from in the room and then we'll go online and we'll alternate. Thank you. Could you just say your name and where you're from?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Stephanie Rea. I'm in politics at Strathclyde. So I have 2 short questions, if that's okay. The first one is, should we still include kind of numbers of articles and books and so on? Or, is that not really that relevant anymore? And then secondly, in the example that we saw of the collaborative, CV, there is separate sections for all the team members. Is that how we should go about it? Or is it okay to kind of have a more merged kind of explanation of the kind of combined contribution of all the team members? Questions to whoever has an answer.
Excellent. So let's take the first question first of all, which is around, do we, how many of those, the quantitative stuff, do we actually include at all, if anything? Hilary, but perhaps you'd like to take that one first?
I think it's a bit about a balance, because if there's some instances where you might need quantitative because it might be relevant to the opportunity, but I think it's all about balance. That would be my main headline. But
I don't know, I think it depends on which quantitative information you're talking about. So if you're talking about number of papers, I think it's still retained, and it's retained in the first section of the narrative CV, the way I say. If instead you're thinking number of PhD students, number of postdocs, the one sure goes in the sentence. I mean, you put it there. But again, I would try to strike a balance, because so from my point of view, now that I read narrative CVs, I've become a bit more critical. So if I read, I have had 13 PhD students in 2 years, I'm actually very critical, and I think they're all miserable. So what do you do for these PhD students? In some sense, I would like a lot more to see a CV where there are 3 PhD students, while you're telling me how you're actually contributing to their development, rather than telling me that you had 25, but I don't know whether they are all miserable in their position and whether they have been miserable after. So this is the way I understand it.
Apparently the mic's not working that one, so that's why I've come to sit down with this mic so that people online especially can hear.
Okay. So with regards to first question, I did not use any number of publications, but I think what's important is that if relevant to the proposal, you have a publication which is like the one that sums up your expertise, I mentioned that. Or you can say I have a number of publications in this area, but you don't really need to specify the number, because it's available freely, like public information, if you go onto anybody's university website. So I think what's important is to highlight the key publications which are very relevant to the work that you're doing. And with regards to your second question about the team, how to write it, this is just my way. So I was also the first one because it was a new call. So when I started, this call came out in 2023. Yeah. It was a long process. It took 1 year from the outline stage to get the funding, which I came to know last year in June. But the award was made in November last year, so it was like some delay. So at the time, there was no example of any narrative CV at Heriot-Watt because it was new. So I thought because it's an interdisciplinary call, it's better to split out like each disciplinary expertise in its own, should have their own section. Yeah, but I think it depends on the call. If the call doesn't really specify that you have to have strong expertise, you have to demonstrate that, then maybe you can write it as a 1 paragraph, but that's just how I did it. And I think it made sense as well because every member was highlighted. Otherwise, you may think that one is hidden. When I started writing my bit, I was like 5 lines, and then my co-investigator has 4 lines, and then the second co-investigator is like, that doesn't look like equality perspective. So I reduced my lines as well so that it doesn't look the hierarchy. But at the same time, because I was the principal lead, so I did have half a line extra.
and just to reassure people, like, and we will also, with Jemima and Maureen, we're working on guidance for team CVs, for organizations and everything, so that people who are writing them, applying for them or reviewing them, that we're feeding in all this best practice. So practical examples like what you said, really, really helpful to help people organize how they approach the team CVs. It's a bit different to an individual. Yeah.
I think the thing to emphasize is that there isn't a one size fits all, you know, so you might actually find that what works better for you is to combine into a narrative Whereas Maureen's given an example of why to separate it out. So again, I think it depends on what call you're going for, the makeup of your team, what you want to highlight, because the modules that were presented are actually the UCRI templates. So you have to respond to, you almost think of them as like leading questions almost that you're responding through. So you're giving them the information that's required in each of those modules. So you can play around with the formats. I think I've played around because I know in mine I've got some bullet points and then I've highlighted some key publications which I felt would really kind of enhance the narrative and actually as an example of what I was describing. And there are maybe some numbers in there which would just potentially be impactful. So it's all about the balance really, isn't it? It's finding that balance as part of the whole story. Thanks for the questions. Emma, did you want to shout out one thing online?
Yeah, so this should be quite a quick one, hopefully. Are there any training resources for those who are assessing the narrative CVs?
I was going to come back to Hilary on that actually, because I know that in discussions we've had, a lot of people in our workshops have said, what are the reviewers experiencing in reading the narrative CVs? Because it's not only a change for us in writing them, but it's also a change for people who are reviewing them, because you can't just skim a list anymore. So can you talk a bit more about the reviewer side of things as well?
So this is a journey for everyone, and we are all on it together. Both as that's a microphone. Okay. Okay, sorry. It's a journey for everyone, and we're all on it together. So yes, reviewers, assessors, we're looking at guidance for organization staff in designing theirs, in helping applicants, but also reviewers. So the whole journey from the design of the opportunity all the way through to the close down of it as well, and the feedback from it. A lot of assessors actually are finding it really great experience. This is what we're hearing from globally. They're really enjoying it. They're actually as excited as many people where they're like, oh my God, the things people are doing. But we are working on that with the community and UKRI so that we have a kind of minimum common product to help reviewers through that as well. Things like as well, how we're also recruiting reviewers. If we're using narrative CVs to recruit panel assessors or reviewers, they'll also have experience of writing one themselves and therefore will come with a different perspective when they come to a particular opportunity. So it's again, that whole permeating through the whole system and the different ways that you can use it will help accelerate the change.
And I think as well, one of the most important things is
that the lists that we used to include in a traditional CV just lists everything that you've done. And I think like Michaela said, it's not just about saying what I've done, it's about what difference it made. You know, how you've actually been either through impact through your research, but also how you might have supported other people to develop. So you could say, oh, I've been on all, 10 committees, but what have those committees led to, And so I think actually so it's about reframing, isn't it, the way that we're sort of explaining what we've done. So not only identifying the invisible things, but what difference those things have made. And it is about being selective, because so many of us actually, I think I did a workshop with some of our colleagues on one of our campuses in Galashiels, and we went around and we went through the iceberg, and I had somebody at the beginning of the workshop saying, I have no idea what to write in my CV because I'm on a teaching and scholarship contract, so I don't have a lot of research funding. I have a few publications, but I want to apply for a narrative CV, use a narrative CV for other purposes. And then we walked through what things they had done, not just in research terms, but in terms of learning and teaching, citizenship, all of the different, supporting PhD students. And he was, at the end of it, he said, oh my goodness, I've done so much that I hadn't thought about before in that way, like in terms of leadership and developing others. And the same, we've had a PhD student before saying, I don't know what to say in my CV because I'm right at the beginning of my research career. And then we were able to tease out, well, you were involved in the union and leadership roles that they'd had, and other, what they'd set up an initiative for students to get together and just do writing sessions together, sitting next to each other with a coffee writing. But they had initiated something to support their other PhD students. So all of this kind of stuff can go into the narrative CVs, which is the hidden stuff. So amazing. We are due to finish at 11:15, so I don't know if Grace, if we're allowed to have one more question, and then I know you were going to do a wrap up, so I don't know how much time you'd like. one more quick question or comment? Yep.
Hello, Neil Burnside, Chancellor's Fellow, Civil and Environmental Engineering. Some fantastic talks. Thank you for your wonderful insights. And something from there, sorry if I missed it, I'm wondering if there's any kind of element of potential, I guess, trickle downs. We talk about assessors and their experience as well. So this is talking about, I guess, grant applications, etc., and job applications. Is this also going to trickle down towards PhD applications as well when people are planning to come in? Because that might be a bit of a challenge. I mean, we're already facing incredible challenges with recruitment in PhD. It's never been harder in terms of the market and the number of candidates applying. So is this, if that's going to come down to PhD level to replicate the rest of the system, as it were, what are the kind of potential challenges and opportunities to overcome that? Because I imagine there'd be a lot of confusion from potential PhD applicants if they have to follow this format.
Great question.
I can try and answer that. So you're saying in relation to PhD applicants, is that, yeah?
Yeah.
So it's a very flexible format, and I think there's also a danger potentially of overthinking it, okay? Because it's not that different from writing a cover letter. You know, if you think it's a bit structured, you know, it guides you through explaining how you are the best person or the best team to do a particular opportunity, peppered with examples or evidence or, you know, different kinds of things. And actually, you know, it could be something that we can try, you know, that we can pilot and test these things and see what the experience is and develop resources to help others as a consequence. Because the earlier people get used to this, the easier it'll be to then help them navigate through the system and even also move to different parts of the sector. Because if you think, I did an experiment with my sister who works in industry, and I gave her a traditional academic CV to fill in. Now, people in universities would want to hire her because she's like top creme de la creme, right? But she wouldn't be hired with a traditional academic CV because she has nothing to offer. She's never won a grant. She's never published anything. I don't think she had mentored anyone or anything. And when she looked, she was like, why are you using this? I can't, like, she wouldn't be hired. We need to open things up more and help everyone at every stage move in and move out and around the system to have that cross-pollination of ideas and the things that are really going to help us create impact and, you know, solutions and so on. We need new tools. And I think the more we can help people earlier beside us, all roles, this works for every kind of role in the system as well, not just those in an academic career. So, well, if you do create things, try and create it and make sure the language is as inclusive as possible. So that people can engage with it. You want to add anything to that?
Would you like to?
No, I was thinking, to be honest, I'd never thought about it, but because I've done a lot of PhD admissions, I was thinking, would this be useful? So I would be wary of like using it as is for PhD admissions. I would be very wary of them. I'm not sure it's a good idea. On the other hand, I was thinking that perhaps it does have one advantage that you could see better how they write. And it would be, so now so you know how people were always sort of encouraged to write not just about what they have done, like scientifically. We always say, yeah, but have also these other activities that you can do in your free time, put them in your CV. And sometimes I feel they exaggerate. They don't understand that the reason why those are there is to show something about your personality. For example, attitude to group working. And sometimes they put in there things that frankly, they backfire because you look at it and you go, okay, maybe not so relevant for your CV. So perhaps putting it in narrative terms, it would help them understand that the reason why you write those things is because you want to still show a skill relevant to your job. But I don't know. I don't know.
Let me just add one thing. So I'm just going back to Hilary's point about the cover letter. I recently had an experience. So this Edinburgh University and Heriot-Watt University doing joint PhD partnerships. And we, so whoever was applying, they had to advertise themselves, like asking for all the PhD applicants. And what I did, exactly the same. So I asked, in addition to asking for a CV, I said, if you are interested, send me your cover letter. And I think I received about 6 applicants, and a couple of covering letters were so impressive. It was like a narrative CV. They weren't talking about the key skills or software they use or whatever, but they just connected their previous experience, like working for a small project with a supervisor, MSc supervisor, for example, and how that connects with the PhD proposal. So I think the traditional way is okay for PhD rather than 4 modules for the narrative CV, probably.
Yeah, I think, and the last note there I think I would make is that I think that the narrative CV principle could work, but not necessarily, you know, that the 4 modules we're talking about today are very much targeted towards applying for research funding, and that's the template that's used by UKRI, for example. But if you're looking for, so for PhD applications might have a different guidance or might have different modules or different things that you're looking for. But I think essentially the bottom line is it the narrative component is what works. Yeah, it's about being able to tell your story relative to the opportunity that you're applying for. So whether that's a PhD studentship, whether it's a job, whether it's a grant, etc.
And the modules are flexible, so you
Yeah.
could list them and it just tweak your guidance
Yeah.
to guide somebody through them for any opportunity.
So on that note, I think we probably have more questions and comments, but we are a little bit behind time. So I'm going to hand back to Grace, but I'd like to thank Hilary, Michaela and Marine for their contributions today. I think it's been really fascinating to see the different perspectives and to really get us thinking about what we can do with our own narrative CVs moving forward. So